In the vast expanse of space, where sentient beings pretentiously referred to themselves as the civilized species, the concept of diplomacy had evolved over millennia to become almost indistinguishable from ritualized warfare. Sure, no one actually died during most diplomatic exchanges. Such a thing would be unthinkable. But the underlying principle remained the same: dominate or be dominated. Be. At the top of this charming social hierarchy sat the Vrax Imperium, a species that resembled an insectoid version of Earth's praying mantis, only much taller, with opposable thumbs and an obsession with military parades. The Vrax had held their position for 12,000 years through a combination of superior technology, ruthless strategic thinking, and a cultural tendency to hold grudges so deeply that their language contained 63 distinct words for retribution, each with its own poetic meter. Below the Vrax, a series of warrior cultures, technocracies, and hive minds danced in a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and calculated insults. These occasional escalations sometimes involved small-scale anti-Atter weaponry, but the political game was always the same. Then, because the universe apparently has a sense of humor, humanity arrived on the galactic stage. The first diplomatic assessment of humans by Vrax intelligence agents contained a line that would later become infamous. Species shows concerning lack of exoskeletal protection and possesses insufficient natural weaponry. Recommendation: classify as harmless curiosity, pending evidence of hidden capabilities. The Vrax, ever the strategists, decided to engineer a diplomatic crisis by releasing a modified pathogen on a human colony world. The pathogen was designed to cause mild respiratory distress and temporary hair loss. Nothing lethal, just enough to provoke a response. Standard procedure dictated that new species would react with anger, threaten military retaliation they couldn't follow through on, and eventually accept their subordinate position after a few concessions. But the humans, in their perplexing way, did not follow the script. A fleet of medical ships arrived at the colony, bringing with them treatment protocols specifically designed to counter the pathogen. The ships didn't just bring medicine. They brought genetic modifications to prevent future susceptibility to similar pathogens. This was not a typical response to an attack. At the next meeting of the Hegemony Council, the human representative, an unassuming figure with the unfortunate name of Ambassador Johnson, stood before the assembled dignitaries. In response to the recent health crisis on New Dakota Colony, the human said with what the Vrax later described as alarming pleasantness, "We are pleased to announce that not only have we developed effective countermeasures, but we're prepared to share our medical protocols with any species that might find them useful." The council chamber fell silent. Even the Galive delegation, who communicated through constant subsonic rumbling, ceased their vibrations. The human continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension. "We've also analyzed the pathogen structure and discovered it may have unexpected applications in treating degenerative neural conditions common to several hegemony species, including the Vrax. Our medical teams have prepared detailed reports, which we are making freely available to all member worlds." The Vrax ambassador, completely stunned, twitched his antennae in what could only be described as existential confusion. This was not how diplomacy was supposed to unfold. This was not how any game was played. Ambassador Johnson, in the most nonchalant manner, added, "We'd also like to extend an invitation to a cultural exchange program. We believe there's much we can learn from each other." As Johnson returned to his seat, the chamber remained eerily still. The Vrax ambassador leaned toward his chief strategist, whispering in their native tongue, "What?" The strategist, who had been analyzing the human response, clicked his mandibles nervously, and replied, "I believe, Exalted One, it was either the most sophisticated counterattack we've ever encountered, or they genuinely don't understand how the hegemony works." The ambassador's compound eyes narrowed. "Find out which, immediately." Little did they know, they were witnessing the first stage of what would later be termed the Kindness Offensive, humanity's unwitting but devastating assault on the very foundations of galactic society. The Vracs, with all their military might and strategic brilliance, had no defense against something as simple as kindness. While the human response seemed baffling, it was exactly what would set off a chain reaction that would gradually transform the very nature of galactic politics. The Vracs' Imperium, once untouchable and unchallenged, was now faced with a threat they couldn't understand. And worse, couldn't control. After the meeting, ambassadors from other species exchange confused looks, while the Vracs begin to prepare for a response. Meanwhile, Ambassador Johnson's actions set the stage for the Kindness Offensive, the campaign of cooperation that would challenge the very idea of galactic domination. Across the galaxy, the ripple effects of humanity's first diplomatic move continued to echo. The Vracs' Imperium, once the undisputed master of galactic strategy, found itself faced with an unprecedented challenge. How does one fight against kindness? How can a civilization with such an overwhelming military presence possibly deal with an enemy that doesn't fight at all? The first response, as expected, was to dismiss the human actions as a temporary anomaly, a mistake on the part of one diplomat. They assumed that humanity's offer of assistance was either a trap or a ruse to lower their guard. But it wasn't. It was a genuine attempt at collaboration, something the Vracs had never encountered before. At the Vracs' High Command, the mood was tense. The Supreme Commander, in a rare display of vulnerability, called an emergency meeting with the high-ranking strategists. The subject was simple: the humans. "What do we do?" The Supreme Commander's voice echoed through the obsidian chamber, a mixture of frustration and confusion. His 4 primary limbs trembled in the way only the Vracs could express, the weight of centuries of military dominance suddenly feeling heavy. The chief strategist, an aging Vrax with a deep-set crease along his carapace, offered a solution that was at once baffling and terrifying. "We monitor them. We observe. Perhaps they are planning something that we do not yet understand. Surely this is some kind of elaborate game." The Supreme Commander's compound eyes narrowed. "If this is a game, we must learn the rules quickly." The human response, however, remained consistent: cooperation, assistance, and mutual benefit. No traps, no veiled threats, just pure, unadulterated kindness. The Vracs' Imperium, in an attempt to keep up their image of strength, had initiated what they called Operation Reassertion. The plan was simple: send a fleet of warships to a human colony, intimidate them with sheer force, and then demand submission under the guise of an alliance proposal. Instead of the expected panic and chaos, the humans greeted the Vracs' fleet with a simple message: "We believe in peaceful exploration. How can we help you?" The message stunned the Vracs' commanders, whose systems were built to detect aggression, not genuine goodwill. The response was simple but effective: a gesture of kindness, an invitation to sit down and talk without conditions. Meanwhile, back in the Vracs' High Command, frustration began to mount. "We do not understand," the Vracs' intelligence director admitted, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "They do not fight. They do not threaten. They simply assist. They fix things. How can we be defeated by such weakness?" A younger strategist, still sharp and untested, offered a theory that sent a shiver through the room. What if their strategy is not to destroy us, but to change us? What if this kindness is their weapon? The room fell into a heavy silence. As weeks went by, humanity's outreach expanded. In the Craxel Federation, a longtime ally of the Vrax, human engineers arrived to help repair critical infrastructure after a devastating refinery collapse. They provided not just repair technologies, but also a new way of thinking, fair trade and resource sharing that did not rely on the classic power struggles. In the Pelkari Confederation, facing a crop blight, human agricultural specialists developed disease-resistant strains and distributed them freely. There were no strings attached, no demands for power, no military threats. The Vrax couldn't comprehend it. It was maddening. They had been programmed to compete and dominate. How could a species that had no apparent interest in power over others defeat them? At the same time, the Vrax intelligence agents had reported something equally distressing. The humans had begun offering scientific collaboration across the board, spreading knowledge freely, an act that was considered a grave violation of galactic tradition. The Vrax had always kept knowledge within their caste system, reserved only for the elite. But now, these humans were shifting the balance. "This is not diplomacy," one Vrax official remarked, looking at the reports. "This is a disease, a plague, and it is spreading." The Vrax began to question. Were they losing the war without even knowing it? Humanity's influence continued to grow, and the Vrax could not keep up with it. They were losing control in ways they had never imagined, and every step they took to contain the human spread only seemed to make the problem worse. The Vrax High Command begins to prepare for their next diplomatic meeting with the humans, unsure of how to handle a species that refuses to play the game of domination. What will they do when faced with humanity's endless goodwill? The galaxy, for all its might and history, had never encountered a force like humanity. The Vrax, who had conquered hundreds of species with military precision, found themselves baffled by a strategy they could not understand, let alone counter. It was not the typical approach to diplomacy, not one based on dominance or manipulation. Instead, humanity offered a different kind of power, the power of cooperation. The Vrax tried to rationalize it. They began to watch more closely, observing the humans' interactions, searching for a hidden motive. Surely, they reasoned, there had to be a trick. The humans, with their frail bodies and seemingly weak technology, couldn't possibly be a threat, could they? But the more they watched, the more confused they became. Humans didn't care for power, didn't crave dominance. They simply wanted to help. They repaired ships, aided colonies in distress, and shared technologies freely, all without seeking any form of payment or favor in return. It was a mystery that plagued the minds of Vrax strategists, and every attempt to probe deeper only revealed more troubling truths. The human strategy wasn't a weapon at all. It was just the way they operated, their default setting. A product of centuries of evolving to prioritize cooperation over conflict. Chapter 2. The first major shift occurred on the industrial world of Corex 4. Once a place of oppressive labor, where workers were controlled by mind-bending neural compliance implants, now found itself becoming a beacon of productivity. Human safety measures were introduced. Work rotations, better treatment of workers, and a focus on collective well-being. The result? A 300% increase in productivity, and a population of workers no longer needing external control to perform their tasks. The Vrax were appalled. How could this be? They'd always believed in control, in asserting power over the lower castes. But humanity was showing them something different. When people were treated with respect and given the freedom to contribute, they worked harder and more efficiently. Simultaneously, the Pelkari Confederation, a once war-hardened species known for its aggressive resource allocation, found its agricultural sector transformed. After the human agricultural specialists introduced resistant crop strains, the Pelkari faced the unexpected: abundance. Crops thrived where they had once failed, and the economy shifted from constant competition to cooperative growth. Other species, who had long been wary of the human contagion, started to notice the benefits. What had once seemed like naivete was now viewed as visionary. Even the most fiercely competitive species in the galaxy, species built on ritual combat and domination, began to take notice. The Jexar, a species of warrior poets, shifted their focus from violent duels to artistic competitions. They channeled their warrior spirit into creative expression, embracing the human ideals of peace and collaboration. Casualties in their society dropped by 87%, and economic output soared. Despite these shifts, the Vrax remained resolute. They couldn't accept what they saw as a betrayal of the Galactic Order. The Supreme Commander of the Vrax Imperium ordered a more aggressive investigation into humanity's true intentions. They would not be fooled. A diplomatic incident was staged to provoke the humans, an insult disguised as a formal debate designed to shame them into submission. But the human response was, once again, not what the Vrax expected. They didn't react with anger or humiliation. Instead, they responded with patience and grace, offering again to cooperate. The humans didn't seek to defend their honor, they simply offered solutions. The Vrax, now visibly confused and embarrassed, started to feel the cracks in their long-held beliefs. Was it possible? Could the galaxy truly function on something as foreign as cooperation? The tipping point came when the Azoran species, a vassal race of the Vrax, made an unprecedented decision. After humans treated a genetic disorder affecting the Azorans, the survival rate for Azoran youth increased by 400%. The Azoran governor, a key figure in maintaining the Vrax's dominance over the species, publicly thanked the humans, stating that their collaboration had saved lives. The Vrax, now fully rattled, dispatched military fleets to quash this betrayal. But in an unexpected turn of events, the Azoran fleet commander refused the Vrax orders. "My people owe a debt to the humans, and I will not repay it by attacking them," the fleet commander stated. This act of defiance was not just a blow to the Vrax. It was a crack in their control over the galaxy. The young Vrax officers, who had been indoctrinated in the ancient ways of dominance and conquest, began to question everything. They were beginning to see that cooperation didn't just make the galaxy a more peaceful place, it made it a more prosperous one. The human message continued to spread across the galaxy, infecting the minds of younger generations, and eventually making its way into the highest echelons of galactic society. Even the once mighty Vrax Imperium couldn't escape the change. The seeds of collaboration and shared growth had been planted, and now they were growing faster than anyone could have predicted. The Vrax knew something had to change, but they had no idea how to fight what they couldn't understand. The galaxy was shifting, and they were beginning to lose their grip on the reins of power. How do you stop kindness? And for the Vrax, the answer was becoming clear. You don't. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Vrax Imperium found itself in uncharted territory. The once unshakable confidence that had guided them through countless conquests and domination had begun to crack. It wasn't a violent rebellion, or a full-scale war that threatened their empire. No, it was something far subtler. Humanity's vision of cooperation. The Vrax leadership was now in a state of constant turmoil. The High Command convened in an emergency session, each member of the ruling elite weighed down by the same question: what happened? The Supreme Commander, whose normally imposing presence had been marred by stress fractures in his exoskeleton, stood at the head of the table. His voice was hoarse, the weight of the galaxy's shifting order bearing down on him. For 12,000 years we have ruled by fear and force. And now we are losing everything to a species that cannot even fight. His compound eyes narrowed as he looked around the room. The strategist sitting beside him, a young Vrax still eager to prove themselves, hesitated before speaking up. Perhaps we are not losing everything, Supreme One. Perhaps we are evolving, as they have. The words felt foreign, almost sacrilegious. Evolution through cooperation. It was an absurd thought in the eyes of the Vrax leadership. Yet the undeniable evidence lay before them. The Vrax had tried everything. They'd attempted diplomacy through aggression, sent fleets to intimidate the humans, and even staged diplomatic humiliations. Yet every move they made only seemed to deepen humanity's influence. The Vrax military might, once a force that could crush planets, was now being undermined not by weapons, but by the ideals of kindness and mutual respect. Throughout the galaxy, humanity's influence continued to grow. The Jexar, fierce warriors who once believed in nothing but combat, had embraced the human ideals of creativity and cooperation. The Pelkari Confederation, traditionally a species of ruthless competition, had embraced the idea of shared prosperity, with humans helping to revitalize entire agricultural sectors. On Corex 4, the once drained industrial world now saw workers not as slaves to their machines, but as active contributors to a shared future. Human-inspired safety protocols and collaboration between workers led to a boom in productivity, all achieved through unity, not coercion. But none of these shifts, not the cultural revolutions or the widespread economic prosperity, had shaken the Vrax as much as what happened on Kazantar Prime, the very heart of their empire. The Vrax High Council had convened once again, this time to discuss the latest developments. Human diplomatic missions had been spreading across the galaxy, not just offering medical aid and technological advances, but restructuring societies in their wake. The first cracks in the Vrax's once impenetrable grip were showing. The Azoran delegation, once subjugated by the Vrax, had made their feelings known. They no longer believed in the old ways. They too had felt the impact of human assistance and had begun to demand changes within the Vrax Imperium. "We are not the only ones to feel it," the Azoran governor had said boldly during a diplomatic summit. "We have been empowered by humanity, and we will no longer stand idly by as you oppress others. Our people owe the humans more than loyalty. They've given us life." The words were a powerful challenge to the very foundation of Vrax rule. And it didn't stop there. Among the Vrax military, whispers of human influence began to spread. The once unshakable loyalty to their commanders began to falter. Military cadets started questioning the necessity of war, suggesting that instead of conquest, the Vrax military could serve as peacekeepers, working with humanity to build a more prosperous galaxy. The Vrax had no defense against this kind of change. The galaxy, which had once bowed to their might, was now beginning to question their authority, not through military power, but through a shift in ideology. As the year drew to a close, the Vrax Imperium found itself facing the unthinkable. Their once proud military was no longer a source of fear, but one of doubt. Their strategic brilliance had been overshadowed by a simple truth. Kindness, cooperation, and mutual benefit were proving more effective than dominance. The Supreme Commander of the Vracs stood before his council, his once great exoskeleton now symbolizing the wear of his position. "What has become of us?" he whispered. "We were the greatest power in the galaxy, and now we find ourselves undone by a species that does not even seek to conquer." As the Vracs continued to question their place in the galaxy, the influence of humanity grew stronger. The idea of cooperation, once an absurdity, had become the new reality. And as the Vracs' leadership looked out over their empire, they realized that their greatest weapon had been their fear of change, and now it was too late. As the Vracs struggled to maintain their identity and power, the human message of collaboration spreads even further, setting the stage for the final shift in galactic politics. The Vracs Imperium, once the undisputed power of the galaxy, was now a shadow of its former self. For the first time in millennia, the Vracs' leadership found themselves questioning their place in the galaxy, not because they had been defeated by force, but because their empire was crumbling from within. Humanity's ideals of cooperation, which once seemed absurd, had transformed the fabric of galactic society in ways the Vracs never thought possible. At the Centennial Great Assembly on Kazantar Prime, the usual displays of power and dominance were absent. For centuries, this event had been a grand show of the Vracs' supremacy, a chance to remind the galaxy of their unchallenged position at the top. This time, however, things were different. Gone were the towering obsidian columns that once intimidated all who entered. The grand atrium, where these meetings had always taken place, had been redesigned, with new symbols of unity and cooperation adorning the walls. The infamous motto, "The strong survive, the weak serve," had been replaced with something that caused shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Strength through cooperation. The Supreme Commander, now known as the First Coordinator, entered the hall with a subtle shift in his once imposing posture. His exoskeleton, no longer gleaming with military pride, was now adorned in simple diplomatic attire, lacking the usual displays of weapons and trophies that had once symbolized Vracs' dominance. As he stepped to the center, a strange sensation crept through the chamber. The once proud, war-hardened warriors of the Vracs delegation were no longer so sure of themselves. They stood in silence, unsure of how to react to the change that had overtaken their civilization. "Esteemed members of the galactic community," the First Coordinator began, his voice betraying a hint of discomfort. "We gather here today at a historic inflection point in our shared existence." The message that followed was not the usual proclamation of superiority, but a humbling acknowledgement of what had transpired over the past year. The Vracs Imperium, once built on the foundations of fear, conquest, and dominance, now found itself calling for something radically different. The past cycle has brought unprecedented change to our established order, the First Coordinator continued. We have witnessed the introduction of new methodologies that challenge our traditional understanding of power dynamics. The Vracs' leadership had finally acknowledged the shift that had occurred, not through violence, but through a simple yet revolutionary concept: cooperation. The human approach, as it is now known, has demonstrated certain efficiencies that cannot be ignored. Resource utilization improves by an average of 42% under cooperative management. Scientific advancement accelerates by similar margins when knowledge is freely shared. Military resources can be redirected to infrastructure development, resulting in strengthened economic positions. The First Coordinator paused, his compound eyes scanning the room, seeking any signs of resistance. None came. Even the most hardened warriors among the Vrax delegation were no longer sure that the old ways were the right ways. We, the Vrax Imperium, propose a restructuring of our interstellar relations based on principles of mutual advancement and shared prosperity. We have prepared detailed implementation plans that will allow for cultural autonomy while establishing new frameworks for trade, diplomatic engagement, and scientific collaboration. As the speech ended, Ambassador Johnson, still the same unassuming human diplomat, rose to address the assembly. There were no grand gestures, no displays of triumph. The humans had never sought to defeat anyone, only to participate. Their stance had always been one of cooperation, not conquest. "We welcome the Coordinator's vision," the human ambassador said, their tone warm yet matter-of-fact. "Earth and her colonies look forward to building this new future together with all peoples of the galaxy." The simplicity of the words was jarring. Here, humanity had not only changed the galaxy, but had done so without a single shot fired, without a single act of war. They had conquered with kindness, with cooperation, with the refusal to play the game of dominance. There was a long pause in the chamber. For the first time, the Vrax leadership felt something they had never experienced before: embarrassment. The grand shows of force, the overwhelming power, the years of dominating others, all of it had been undone, not by military might, but by simple generosity. As the first coordinator met Ambassador Johnson after the speech, there was a strange, almost resigned look in his eyes. The Vrax, once the pinnacle of power in the galaxy, now found themselves having to adapt. Their entire way of life, their understanding of how the universe worked, was upended. "You've won, haven't you?" the first coordinator asked, his voice laced with something that sounded like reluctant respect. "No," said the human ambassador, his smile kind but firm. "We didn't win anything. We were never in a competition." As the proceedings shifted to a more informal gathering, what had once been a dominance-driven affair became something completely different. Representatives from across the galaxy, species once oppressed by the Vrax, now mingled freely with the Vrax delegation. They shared knowledge, resources, and even laughter. Cooperation was no longer a theoretical ideal. It was now a reality. The first coordinator watched this scene unfold, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never known: hope. Perhaps, he thought, this new order was not the end of the Vrax, but the beginning of something better. As the meeting ended and the delegates filed out, there was no fanfare, no grand speeches, just a quiet understanding. The galaxy had changed. The Vrax Imperium, in all its might, had been replaced by something new, something better. The age of dominance had passed. In its place, a new era of collaboration and shared prosperity had begun. The galaxy was no longer ruled by the strong alone, but by all who were willing to work together, to share, and to help one another. The Vrax Imperium, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, now has to navigate this new world of cooperation. The galaxy is united, but how will the Vrax adjust to this new order of peace and collaboration?